The Arc the Lad series has had its ups and downs. The quality's a bit all over the place, but it's always been consistent in that each title was a tactical RPG. After such a predictable stint, it offers a familiar embrace where even if the game ends up being garbage, the initial leap is comforting. That is, until End of Darkness, which is a messy action RPG where you're encouraged to play online with other suckers. While it is a sequel to Twilight of the Spirits, it shares practically nothing in common other than the setting, but even the world and characters within are little more than hollow appeals at garnering brownie points through meaningless references. I will say, I did clap though. The Twilight roster was fine, but I wasn't so attached to them that I wanted to see more of their stories. It felt complete, so this attempt falls flat on its face. As for the gameplay, it rapidly follows, every time you run into a physical object. Or sometimes a non-physical object that you can't even see. Whatever, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go back to the story for a sec, because I can take some cheap shots to warm up. The opening cutscene goes out of its way to show off the past 4 games, which will ultimately serve to rub in how dogshit this one is. Nothing screams, we're confident we made a good game, like immediately reminding you of your treasured memories. We open to our new protagonist Edda, or Alec III, no relation, landing on the Isle of Homojis from the former game. He may look visually distinct at first, like a particular someone we know, with dark hair, dark complexion, and a mysterious origin. However, as this takes place only 5 years after Twilight, he's just some guy, and more specifically some guy who can exercise super special demons, which he calls maledemons. Our little exorcist runs into a wiped mercenary group taken out by one of these maledemons and shows off his skills in front of an even more mysterious anime girl. She bails, then he decides to become a hunter to impress her. Man, the simping game's changed, eh? Men used to have to go outside for that shit. Oh yeah, the Hunter Guild's back, because a character isn't truly an Alec type without a meaningless goal, and equally meaningless metric to measure it. Edda's best mate, Hemo, meaning blood, is a Homoji, and he's not Slothian at all, it barely looks like one either. Now, I suspect that he's a Hafu, a half-sloth, half-dipshit retard. This little fella serves as both the mascot and comedic relief, but fails spectacularly at both, a horribly designed character in every respect. Arc the Lad didn't really have a mascot. It had a lot of little fun critters, but outside of Arc himself and, maybe Choco and Deekbeck, the roster wasn't consistent enough to elect a representative. That said, there were so many better choices than an Easter decoration. When you think iconic video mascots, shit that makes you immediately recognize the brand and the gaming series, you think greasy Italian plumber, a hedgehog's crinkly stinklies, exploding penguins, blue-haired dragon boy, happy snowman. Not an egg with a face, bro, sorry. These two link up and meet Maru from the last game, who is a crowned prince or king or something, and he gives us the ability of accessing the pause menu. That is not a joke, you cannot pause for an hour of this horrid shit. The concept of the menu's sorta neat though, as it's a dual disc and everything within takes the form of cards, which allow us to accept hunter quests for some reason. After roughly 10 hours of mindlessly rushing extermination quests and introducing ourselves to characters from the last game, we get a taste of the plot, which is about a terrorist uprising, but then it's immediately revealed that the mysterious girl from the start manipulated them to make an exorcism gun. Her father performed some research which spawned a really dangerous maledemon, and she wanted to fix his mistake, so she used a terrorist outfit to that end. Little did she realize the gun didn't work, so a big strong exorcist comes to save the day. They even joke at the end about how a simple conversation would have made the events unnecessary, which is a huge fuck you to a returning Arc player who's still recovering from the third game. It's also a big fuck you to story writers, JRPG fans, common human decency. That's the core story, and most is delivered through unvoiced cutscenes, only half of which can be skipped. If they have letterboxing, you're golden, otherwise these anime cutouts have to be rapidly mashed through to avoid inhaling as much of the dialogue as possible. Progression is typically achieved by finding the right NPC flag and involves a lot of pointless talking. The fact that this is coming from a JRPG guy, a man so immersed in garbage dialogue I pick it out of my ears at night, should speak volumes. Occasionally, you'll be forced to select every option in a dialogue tree to get the specific amount of exposition for shit that doesn't end up mattering anyway. And much like Arc 3, everyone immediately trusts and loves Edda, this child who came out of nowhere to become the greatest guy in all guild history. That's right, get fucked, Alec. The world, though familiar, feels like a vanity representation of Twilight, where the former game built scenarios and environments featuring diverse cultures and species, End of Darkness pastes them everywhere and hopes no one will notice the complete lack of substance. Like, Gans gets kidnapped by the terrorists at one point, but who cares? Why do I care about Gans? And how are a pathetic terrorist organization getting one over on a guy who killed the physical embodiment of darkness? Then there's a scene where Edda says the terrorists should not be executed, even though they experimented on Deimos children and killed innocent people. And then, when the dude runs away, he threatens revenge. Just kill him, bro. Stop being so fucking anime. Oh, we can never hurt anyone, even when they hurt us. No! Dickhead! Following each hunter quest is a couple lines of lore too, but I don't care, shut up. This game shouldn't have text at all, just let me mindlessly blast through the mission so I can shit on them in the next segment. End of Darkness hits a hard wall after the introduction, as each Hunter quest is MMO tier and the story missions are locked behind them, and are equally shitty. Man, that's really ringing a bell. While it was multiplayer focused, I just can't see 4 to 8 dudes running around these tiny maps with a couple enemies in each. There's minimal challenge to the game, which would be further exacerbated if you had 5 Darks, a couple of Kargs, and a Lilia, who, probably should be a Karg on any given quest. One of the most egregious sins of gaming is screwing up the basic controls, and End of Darkness goes above and beyond to make the experience as frustrating as possible. The X button attacks, square is a shoulder barge, circle uses an exorcism jab with Edda or a special technique with other characters, and triangle... I hate triangle. Holding it enables Edda to run, which is great, as I can move through this horrible game faster, but if you so much as look at a physical object, he trips over in a comically overblown slapstick sort of way. This occurs if you bump holes in the ground, or, walls that aren't explicitly defined and are semi-invisible based on weird terrain layouts, and when he falls, he drops for a solid couple seconds and is vulnerable to attacks. This is one of the worst features I've ever seen in a video game, like no exaggeration, just straight up makes the game feel 100 times worse than it already does. There are 3 bars on the screen. Health is obviously health, but the blue and green bars are strange. The blue is for abilities and magics, but the green is a secondary bar which specifically recharges your blue bar and acts as a reserve tank. These also require manual restoration instead of just topping themselves up after a mission, which is a complete waste of time. Speaking of, there are 2 main classes of quest, narrative quests and nothing quests. Both need to be completed to a specific amount to unlock the next guild test to increase your rank, and as I said before, both equally suck. The completion of each is represented by a respective meter with 10 notches. Story quests are worth 5 points, so in any given rank you'll have 2 story chunks, whereas side quests are star-based and pay out that many stars upon completion, ranging from 1 through 5. Each bar must be filled to progress in the guild ranks, which allows you to access more story and more side quests. Every objective can be broken down into fetching shit, killing a set amount of shit, escorting shit, or defending shit. It's the gambit of generic lazy quest design, it's very mid-2000s. Ranking up isn't solely tied to story progress, it's a core power up for Edda, as there aren't really levels or experience. The ranks themselves increase your magic by 2 bars per stage, allowing more usage out of your equipped techniques. Increasing this is achieved through a string of rounds in the arena with varying requirements, such as killing and capturing monsters, with the final mission always a battle against a legendary historical figure. Legitimately, the best part of the game was beating the shit out of Alec. It's a shame it came 30 hours in, and wasn't the entire experience. Many of these fellas can be unlocked for play in the side quests by acquiring their cards, and they also feature a sort of experience and level meter. As they don't rank up through story progress, dispatching Malademons yields SP, a particular currency which can be expended to increase their personal ranks, but again, this only increases their magic use. Our old buds aren't canonical, but still appear during the promotion tasks, which are story events, so what the fuck am I supposed to believe? Does this world, 1005 years after Arc the Lad 3, canonically contain Alec or not? And if not, why is he in a story segment? What is the point of revisiting all our old buds from Twilight if the integrity of the world doesn't matter at all, and Alec's here ruining the party? One of the first fellas you unlock is Elk, which is great, I love that little dude, but what's bizarre is that because Edda has a staff thing, Elk couldn't exactly have a spear, which would play very similarly, which means he uses his fists. They couldn't even set up the references properly because Edda had to be the star of the show. All meaningful character progression comes from equipment and equipped abilities. Each character has a weapon slot, an armor slot, and one for an accessory, and with 5 stats, it's an interesting balancing act. There's physical power, magic power, some weird engineering stat for using trinkets, a defense, and of course, speed, which affects your actual movement speed. Characters have their particular strengths and weaknesses, but Edda, the character you're forced to use for every story segment, is dogshit at everything. Since all customization comes in the form of cards, even basic spells and equipment can be fused to create stronger, more effective components. But outside of stronger magics, I never use this for anything else. There's entire lists of equipment you can fuse, but it seems like you need to do quite a bit of farming to get anywhere near the amount of parts to make half-decent gear. Most of your stuff is bought from stores or found within the world. Even the quests come in card format, as there are only a handful of actual maps, and triggering a side quest is done from the overworld with cards resting over a vague area. It was nice in that I didn't want to explore the world of Twilight in such a disgusting hollow state, and I didn't have to think too much about where to go. At the very least, End of Darkness expects as much from the player as it deserves. The maps themselves, though, they're not great. If they're not straight up ripped from Twilight, they're either annoying or infuriating to navigate, depending on how you feel about Zelda clone dungeons and constantly tripping over nothing. The best thing I can say about them is that they're bland and overstay their welcome. The hubs are connected through transition points, taking the form of doors or paths, but these only activate if enemies aren't aggroed to the player, and the criteria for enemy attention is sporadic. Sometimes I ran straight past an enemy chasing me and it would let me straight through, but occasionally the enemy would be off screen and wouldn't let me move. You know when enemies have taken a fancy to you, as there are two modes of traversal. When you're not the target of monsters, your map is a neutral colour and you can run at full speed. But once enemies have you in their sight, your map turns red and your run speed drops significantly. I'd often be actively engaged with enemies only to see my map flicker to and from red, like, do you want to fight or not? Despite my whinging about running into invisible shit, you get a feel for what parts of the map are walkable pretty quick, as if something is underfoot, it'll probably trip you or is an invisible wall, so as long as the ground is clear, you're golden. That is, until one story mission, where you have to step over a crack, which in any other mission would have you on your ass. I feel like at this point you've got a rough idea of how horrible this game is, but you have no fucking idea. Let's talk about the combat. I've been tiptoeing around it up to this point, but combat is as bad as the rest of the experience, to absolutely no one's shock. It's slow, there's awkward wind-ups between every technique which have no weight or commitment to them and often devolves into tedious circle strafing or healing through hit trades. It feels amateurish, and it was, because despite not being the team that stuck it through the original 3, the fuckers clearly had never made an action game before. Or a good one anyway. Your standard combo stunlocks most normal enemies, which is great as they're not worth the magic juice to take them out. The strat for big monsters is to lock on, use 2 of your 3-hit combo, dodge to either side, doesn't matter which side, just dodge to one, and then rinse repeat until they drop. These are the 2 approaches you'll face throughout your entire time playing, which completely overshadows the actual variety in enemy designs. It's a damn shame. Malademons are a bit tougher as they don't stagger and function like annoying mini-bosses, which, I guess is what they are. The same strat applies too. Lock on, dodge when approach, feel your timing out, and win with ease. What sucks about these bastards is that if you hit them after their health is gone, instead of exercising them, they recover a decent chunk, so you gotta keep your mash game strong but moderated. Only sometimes though, because sometimes they just die. Speaking of, if you die in a side mission, you reap immense penalty in that you lose all your equipped skills. Imagine, you've spent a decent stack of cash synthesizing some nice magics for your boy Dark and making one silly mistake, such as playing End of Darkness, and you gotta do it all again. That entire stack you spent your valuable time sourcing the parts for and funding is now just gone, and there's nothing you can do to reclaim your lost property. Which naturally begs the question, why? This wouldn't be a huge penalty if quests boiled down to simply dispatching monsters, but as I mentioned before, there are defend quests, time quests, and of course the dreaded escort mission, where an ally dying results in failure. These intersecting vectors for mission failure mean that any given side quest, which remember you are forced to do, can lead to an inventory wipe. I'm usually the first person to apologise for roguelike and roguelite elements. If you've watched my video on Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, you'll see that to an embarrassing degree, but the distinction is that losing your hard-earned things should add to the game somehow. If it fails to add something, then you have failed in implementing that system. I mean, it also helps if your game isn't complete dogshit. As much as escort missions are a chore, there are some lenient additions here which I want to mention because I think they're genuinely great and certainly aided me in not quitting the game halfway through. The friends you take with you on your journeys aren't always pathetically weak. Oftentimes it feels like the one being escorted is you, and as far as I can see, they have no limit on their magic pools, making them even stronger. Transitioning to a new map restores their health to full as well, and I don't think the game would be beatable without this feature, and even then, it's a toss-up. The limitations of combat are always the most prevalent in tougher encounters, particularly against bosses. While some can be stun-locked or are susceptible to a bit of area of effect magic, the tiny arenas and physical mass of most elite monsters, coupled with how horrible the controls are, make these encounters rage-worthy. I've covered a lot of issues with End of Darkness, but on the whole, it's playable. Where I genuinely begin to question that is in the final boss, who serves as a brilliant example of how you should never, ever make a final boss or a final stage. Taking place in the ruins of Cathena, which I thought got super nuked, but apparently it was only a little bit nuked, it contains a horde of story and cutscenes, and every time you lose, you gotta run all the way back through it, story and all. Some of the cutscenes are skippable, but there are a few, such as Edda reading a book, where you have to manually move through each of the 30-odd pages before it'll trigger the next event, which, sucks when you're forced to replay the area like 10 times. Once you finally arrive at the big boy, he's a giant carousel-looking plant freak and comes rocking an arsenal of only the poorest decisions. He can summon swarms of bees that aren't too strong but lock on from across the room, and getting hit by anything in this game staggers you, so they're very annoying. Alongside these are big lettuce monsters who slowly charge you. If you're far away, he'll throw a flurry of ostensibly randomly positioned rocks, again staggering you if even one connects. So ranged combat is a no-go. He's got too much annoying bullshit to engage at that distance. Well, how about close combat? If you stand too close to him, he springs out this clitoris face with no wind-up, barely any cooldown, and which instantly knocks you over. Okay, cool. It's too quick to dodge, and melee does practically no damage anyway, so your best gambit is timing ranged attacks between his hordes of micro bullshit. Once he gets down to certain health thresholds, he'll spring into the sky to summon more iceberg lettuce which become trapped in his root legs. Dispatching 3 of these will drop him back down, but in addition to those, you have to deal with roaming lettuces and a big rotating laser attack which takes up the entire field in segments of 3. The idea is to move between them, which is fairly easy if you get a good start. About half the time, the laser would spawn where I either couldn't move out of the way in time or directly on me, which, naturally caused some issues with my controller's integrity. You can see where his laser spouters are pointed if you're at the back of the arena, but I can't see a way to differentiate between what row they'll occupy, so it's pretty much a guessing game. Even if you can see where his laser hits and you're perfectly positioned, the finicky way the run works occasionally requires you to take damage. As I mentioned earlier, run is only available if you're not actively engaged with the enemy, so if some bees or a lettuce pod get too close to you to an undefined degree, you can't run. And unless you're super lucky with positioning, the standard movement speed isn't enough to consistently dodge the lasers. Also, if you run but bump into one of the many physical objects scattered throughout the area, you'll fall over and take direct laser damage. Eventually, you'll learn the patterns and timings to beat him though, and once it's over, it's over. Thank fuck for that. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. There's a second phase, and if you thought it'd be any better, you are wrong and stupid. Come on, bro, you should know better by now. Our big boy becomes a beleged crocodile plant guy, and his attacks change up completely. Also, it's an escort mission, and if you lose here, you have to redo the entire dungeon, first phase and all. If this chick dies, it's game over and she only has enough health for like 2 or 3 hits depending on the attack. This is where a high speed stat is non-negotiable, as he has a barge move that happens fairly quickly and you're only given 4 destructible objects to hide behind. Due to the weird way the game calculates whether or not you can run, his second attack where he jumps to the ceiling and attempts to drop on you can become completely undodgeable if you can't run and have a low speed. As he moves along the roof, he draws this drippy poison shit too, which can stun lock you in place, and upon landing does a shit ton of damage, plus a cheeky shockwave to knock you on your ass if you're in range. Because of his huge attack areas, moving anywhere near your hired escort is ill-advised, especially if you get stun locked and all you can do is watch as he drops on you both. This means you've really only got half the arena to work with, which sucks even harder as the middle of the arena is a physical object, and so are the tiny plant spawning circles from the last phase, which you trip over if you run into. As you're only dealing with him and not 100 little annoying enemies as well, he is marginally less infuriating, assuming you can avoid his stun-locking saliva. However, it gets worse. I know you're thinking, how is that even possible? Bro, this is like fucking... If bad boss design is a school of study, this is like art. Now, what do we know about Malademons? They need to be exercised, and what happens when we don't exercise Malademons, but instead attack them? They recover a chunk of their health. If you'll remember, some time ago I mentioned how the girl has an exorcism gun that doesn't actually exercise and is effectively just a standard attack. You probably see where I'm going with this, and you're correct. Every time you stun the boss and prep him for a cheeky bit of exercise, this absolute harlot will shoot him and restore a chunk of his health. She can't hit him while he's mobile, which is supposed to stun him and allow you to attack him safely, but the second you need it to not do anything, she's suspiciously there and incredibly accurate. I lost 2 runs to this shit because I had no magic left and couldn't damage him enough with melee to get him back down. Each run took me anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how nice the enemies were and how quickly I rolled his first form. Overall, it probably took me 15 runs to have the RNG line up to clap his moldy cheeks, so I probably sat through 10 to 15 hours of this bullshit. That's enough time to play the original arc again. Then at the end, I'm treated to a "thanks for playing to the end" message. I deserve much more than a sentence. I deserve a medal. There's some post-game scenes, but I don't think I can do it. I physically can't drag myself through any more of this shit, and nothing's gonna change. The game won't suddenly become good 25 hours in, so I'm done. I respectfully admit defeat on the post-game content. End of Darkness is, hands down, one of the most thoughtless, careless games I've ever played. It shits on its predecessor, it shits on the series as a whole, and shits on the player with its horrible gameplay and narrative. At least they learned their lesson and cancelled the series after this point. Thankfully, mashing up the best characters from the past game in a throwaway nothing experience featuring online elements and stupid progression systems wrapped in a meaningless narrative will never come back to haunt us. I'll see you next time for the Arc the Lad R video.